Silence is the soundtrack of a well-built life. At least that's what I believed as I looked out the window of our Upper East Side apartment in New York. The city, a gigantic labyrinth of concrete and lights, seemed to wrap me in a familiar, protective embrace. My name is Eleanor Vance, and at 35 years old, I had it all. A successful career as an art curator at one of Fifth Avenue's most prestigious galleries, an apartment straight out of an architecture magazine, and a 10-year marriage to David, the man I thought was my safe harbor. The air conditioning whispered, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the kitchen. The atmosphere was one of serene luxury, a golden bubble separating me from the chaos of the world outside. My life was a work of art, meticulously arranged, each piece in its rightful place. And I was the artist, proud of my perfect canvas. But a perfect canvas can hide cracks. In my case, the cracks were so subtle that I ignored them, mistaking them for the natural erosion of time. David, my David, was the architect of my blind confidence. He was a corporate lawyer, charming, intelligent, always with an answer for everything. Our routine was a choreographed ballet of elegant dinners, weekend trips to the Hamptons, and charity galas. I was his perfect partner, his right hand, his accomplice in Manhattan's social game. My vulnerability lay in my unconditional faith in him. I trusted his word the way I trusted the law of gravity. He was my north, my anchor, and I allowed myself to be vulnerable because, with him, I felt invincible. He was the foundation of my world, and I never once considered the possibility that foundation might crumble. In the last 6 months, the silence I had once cherished began to sound different. It became heavy, filled with unexplained absences and attention I struggled to ignore. The goodnight texts stopped arriving, the business trips grew more frequent, and the embraces that were once long and comforting now felt rushed, distant. He guarded his phone more closely, and little lies about time spent at the office began to pile up. I, in my naivete, blamed everything on work stress. "It's merger and acquisition season, love," he would say with a tired smile, and I believed him. Trust was a veil that kept me from seeing what was right in front of me. My heart wanted to believe, even as my intuition began to scream. The trigger wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a shout or a confrontation. It was banal, almost trivial. One Tuesday afternoon, while searching for a pair of shoes on the top shelf of our shared closet, a small folded receipt fell out of David's jacket pocket. A receipt from a florist, dated the day before. A modest purchase, a bouquet of lilies. No flowers had come home. My heart skipped. The date, the time, the type of flower, all echoed something I didn't want to hear. I remembered David saying he'd stayed late at the office for a video call. That tiny, insignificant lie was the splinter that cracked my bubble. The receipt burned in my hand, and in that moment, the perfect world I had built with him began to dissolve. That piece of paper became the starting point of my journey, not of destruction, but of reconstruction. Distrust, once planted, grows like a weed, choking faith and peace. The florist's receipt was the seed. Suddenly, every absence, every muffled laugh on the phone, every flimsy excuse took on a sinister meaning. The man I loved and trusted blindly began to reveal himself as a stranger, an actor in a play I hadn't known I was part of. David, my perfect husband, my partner of 10 years, was in truth the antagonist. He became the embodiment of betrayal, the figure of trust turning into a predator. The smile that once soothed me now looked like a mask for malice. With every new detail I uncovered, every lie I unraveled, a small part of me dissolved. But in the dissolution, something else, something stronger, began to solidify. And where there's a traitor, there's often an accomplice. The other woman was Sophia, a junior associate at David's firm, 10 years younger, with the kind of effortless beauty that made my body, marked by stress and fatigue, feel outdated. The photos I found, at first by accident, later intentionally, showed a David I didn't recognize, relaxed, carefree, with a spark in his eyes that had long since vanished when he looked at me. Their dynamic was one of shared secrets, a parallel world I, the wife, was forbidden to enter. They were accomplices in an elaborate farce, a dance of manipulation and deceit that made me wonder if my entire life had been a lie. Sophia's presence, the younger, supposedly more vibrant rival, sharpened the sting of betrayal. It wasn't just infidelity, it was replacement. The initial pain was overwhelming, a tsunami crashing over me. I could have surrendered to rage, to hysteria, to the urge to smash and scream. I could have confronted David the instant I discovered the truth, thrusting the receipt in his face and demanding answers. That was the expected reaction, the one he likely anticipated. But something inside me, a voice I hadn't heard in years, whispered, "No, Eleanor, don't be impulsive. Be strategic." I looked at my reflection in the mirror and saw the fragility David had exploited, the naivete he had used against me. And in that moment, the transformation began. The trusting, innocent wife gave way to a strategist, an implacable detective. I didn't just want the truth. I wanted justice. And justice, I realized, would not come from screaming or tears, but from evidence and a plan, meticulously executed. My preparation began in secret, in the silence of the night while David slept beside me, unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. I became a private investigator of my own life. I installed apps to track messages and emails, hired a private detective to monitor his movements, and collected every receipt, every message, every subtle clue he left behind. I documented every lie, every absence, every behavioral shift. The process was painful, each new discovery like a knife in my chest, but the pain turned into fuel, feeding my resolve. I created spreadsheets, organized evidence, and with each piece I gathered, my strength grew. I was no longer the victim, but the architect of a plan. My confrontation wouldn't be a scene of unbridled fury, but a calculated performance, an elegant trap he couldn't escape. The stage was set for the annual Gallery Gala, the most important night of New York's art season. The city's elite would be there, collectors, critics, journalists, and of course David, playing the part of the proud, faithful husband. He and Sophia, invited as a guest of his firm, had no idea that the night they expected to be another celebration of their double life would be their public downfall. I wore a black silk dress, elegant and understated, contrasting with the complexity of the web I had woven. The gallery air smelled of flowers and champagne. The dim light lent an intimate, deceptive atmosphere. The works of art hanging on the walls seemed like silent witnesses to the drama about to unfold, each brushstroke an ironic commentary on the beauty of appearances. I was calm, so calm that the lack of nerves surprised me. The confrontation wasn't a shout, but a series of soft, cutting revelations. I approached David and Sophia in the center of the room, where most guests were gathered. In a controlled, steady voice, I began to narrate our story, our marriage, the love I had believed in. At first, David smiled, thinking I was giving a loving tribute. Slowly, my words sharpened. "I remember the day you bought lilies for your secretary, because she was sick," I said, locking eyes with David, whose face went pale. "And the night you worked late, when a restaurant receipt from Brooklyn just happened to fall from your jacket pocket." With each sentence, the crowd around us grew still, realizing this wasn't a toast but a trial. Sophia shrank beside him, her smile collapsing into shock and fear. The inversion of power was total, crushing, cathartic. I pulled out my phone, and instead of projecting the gallery's new centerpiece artwork as arranged with the tech team, the screen displayed the evidence my detective had gathered. Photos of David and Sophia together, on trips, in restaurants, in hotel rooms. The music cut off. My words, now soft but clear, became the only sound that mattered. Panic filled David's eyes as his image, the successful lawyer, the perfect husband, shattered in front of everyone. Sophia tried to flee, but the crowd hemmed her in, horrified yet enthralled. They were no longer a secret couple, but a spectacle of disgrace. Control, once theirs, was now entirely mine. I felt liberated, as if a 10-year weight had been lifted. The power David had wielded to manipulate me now turned against him, and his fall was spectacular. The aftermath was swift and devastating. That very night, I changed the locks and initiated divorce proceedings. The evidence I had gathered so meticulously ensured David lost not only our home, but also much of his fortune and reputation. The scandal spread like wildfire, and his career at the firm was destroyed. The man he had crafted, his shining social persona, collapsed quickly and spectacularly. The mistress, Sophia, saw her own reputation stained, becoming persona non grata in the very social circles she had hoped to enter. For them, the night was an ending. For me, it was the beginning of something new. I was no longer Mrs. David Vance. I was simply Eleanor. Liberation didn't come with screaming or resentment, but with a sigh of relief. In the months that followed, I reconnected with myself. The Eleanor who had been lost in David's shadow re-emerged, stronger, more aware, and above all, more secure. I began redesigning my life, not to erase the past, but to build a future truly mine. I moved into a loft in Soho, open and, filled with light, the opposite of our old apartment, a mausoleum of luxury. Every decision, from wall colors to the art I chose, became an act of self-affirmation. The pain of betrayal became the foundation of a new fortress, one David could never breach. My liberation wasn't won through brute force, but through intelligence and strategy. The true victory was not vengeance, but personal growth. Revenge, while satisfying, wasn't the ultimate goal. The real reward was reconnection with my essence, the discovery of an inner strength I hadn't known I possessed. I picked up painting again, a hobby abandoned during the marriage, and the colors I used now seemed brighter, more alive. Friendships I had neglected were rekindled, and I allowed myself to be vulnerable once more, this time with people who loved me for who I was, not for who I was with David. Reconstruction was slow and painful, but each brick I laid was a step toward a more authentic, meaningful life. I had lost a home, but I had found myself. The future was no longer a terrifying unknown, but a blank canvas. I considered moving to Los Angeles, starting anew in a city where the art scene thrived, and David's shadow would no longer follow me. The thought of new love, of allowing myself to be vulnerable again, was daunting, but not impossible. My greatest lesson was clear. Self-love is the only true foundation, and blind trust, no matter how beautiful it seems, can be the deadliest trap. My story wasn't just about betrayal and vengeance. It was about the journey of a woman who, when destroyed, found the strength to rebuild and become her own heroine. In the end, I realized my story was never about David or Sophia. It was about me. And what I discovered was that my strength wasn't in my innocence, but in my ability to be strategic and resilient. The life David tried to destroy had, in truth, given me the chance to build something far more authentic. And now, I turn to you, the silent witness who has walked with me through this journey of downfall and rebirth. Perhaps, somewhere in my story, you recognized yourself or someone you love in the doubts, the wounds, the choices made when the ground crumbles beneath our feet. If these pages have stirred something within you, don't let them end in silence. Share your thoughts, your own stories, your scars transformed into strength, because in the end, these aren't just my words, they are our voices, interwoven, reminding us that it is always possible to rebuild and perhaps to be reborn even stronger.